we're right about to go live, just announcing it so everyone is aware. And there we go. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Hey, welcome to the very first Defend section group conversation. So we have a presentation, this just a little bit of talk track. This group was just formed. It has been part of, we've seen the Defend category on our homepage for almost the entire year. But we now have a specific set of individuals working on Defend related features in our first MVC this release. So we wanted to start having regular group conversations. So with that, I will open it up for questions. The first one is from Cindy, I believe. Cindy, do you want to verbalize your question?
Sure, happy to. So my question is it realistic to think that we can get to minimal viable product on across all of the Defend categories in 1 quarter, which is what the maturity slide is showing?
So I'll answer first, and Sam, you can follow up. I will say we always plan ambitiously. We try to make the category maturities realistic, though. I will say that I think of the category maturity increments, so from planned to minimal to viable, as increasingly larger efforts per one. Like an MVC is, just like we say, something you can do in 1 iteration. And I am confident that Sam and the team can think of very small iterations for each one of those. I have this thing in my head that I actually wasn't here at GitLab for, so maybe somebody else can comment on it, but I know that when we started the secure stage, we similarly created a whole bunch of MVCs rather quickly for entire categories of scanning tools. And so I'm confidently optimistic that we can do the same in Defend. And I will say we're starting today, and we have the official end is in January, our calendar year, or our fiscal year end. So it's more than just 1 quarter. Maybe the category maturity increment or maturity page lists them all in the 4th quarter, but we have some time. Sam, care to comment?
Yeah, just to add on to that a little bit. One of the other things in the Defend stage is we're going to be hiring very aggressively to build out this team. So as more and more team members come join, we'll be able to move much more quickly as well. So combined with the fact that, these are going to be MVCs, first iterations on these different capabilities, it is an aggressive goal to get to an MVC for all of these, but that's what we're shooting for right now. And as we learn more and, figure things out, we will potentially move those around as we have more confidence that they will or will not be, at that given maturity level.
Cool. Christopher, you have the next question.
Yeah, thanks, Kenny. So it's kind of similar to Cindy's question. Just looking for if we have any sense for product market priority for the various categories. And I'm not necessarily looking for like a absolute list as much as I'm just looking for like these are the 2 or 3 that really customers have been asking for or giving us feedback that they're really interested in.
Sam, you and I were talking yesterday about some sensing you'd heard about a couple of the categories. Why don't you answer that one?
Yeah, so in terms of rough prioritization for the different categories in the Defend stage, we're still trying to get feedback and make sure we're focusing on the most important ones first. So, this is going to be my take today, but could change in the future as we learn more. We're going to be starting with the WAF because as we have more and more of our GitLab users and use cases focusing on web applications, there's a real opportunity to make a difference in securing those apps by blocking malicious traffic. After that, what I'm thinking for our second category to emphasize is going to be vulnerability management. As the WAF capability matures, we're going to start getting a lot more data, a lot more information about live attacks as they happen. So being able to manage the results, manage the vulnerabilities we're able to identify is going to be another important value point we can provide to our users. And then after that, container network security is kind of what I've got on my list as number 3. Again, since web applications, Kubernetes and clusters are going to be key use cases for a lot of our users. Being able to make sure that those networks aren't being exploited or used inappropriately, is another place we can add value. But it has been interesting. I've had a couple conversations this week and last week focusing on data loss protections, that's DLP, as well as storage security. So going to be digging into that some more in the near future to figure out, is that an area that we need to emphasize sooner than some of those other categories?
And I'll point out that, we're talking about moving from planned to minimal here. So these are all MVCs. Part of the job of those MVCs is to also get some additional sensing information about how customers feel about those MVCs and what direction we should take them and which ones we should focus on. So I do think there's an opportunity as Sam stated, like as we have MVCs out in the wild that customers are using, we'll be getting great feedback. Olivier.
Yeah, thanks. Could you explain a bit how the vulnerability management category will play with what is currently being done in Secure with the dashboard and the first-class vulnerabilities workflow? Because I have a feeling that this kind of end up in the same area, whatever it's coming from live vulnerability from the live application, or vulnerability from the source code or the dependency that are also impacting the live application, but it's not coming from the live environments. But we still have the same process of dealing with the vulnerability once we catch them. So how do you think about this interaction?
Sam, before you answer, I do want to throw a little bit of a loop here. I had a really great conversation with Becca Leipert, who is the new product designer on Defend, yesterday about I think the natural inclination when we think about Defend is to equate it to like we should use and leverage some of the same tools that we use in Secure. But I actually wonder if the more natural one is use and leverage the things we use in Ops or configure and monitor. So maybe a vulnerability comes in as an incident, not as a vulnerability. I don't know, Sam, if you've thought much about that, but having that conversation yesterday was great to help me solidify thinking about where the actions to be taken from the Defend category land, and that they might not land in the Secure functionality we have today.
Yeah, I mean, similar to the comment you made, Kenny, about tying it with monitor or ops related things. I think a lot of the Defend capabilities we're going to build out are going to be very closely related to Secure capabilities as well. Olivia, your question is a great one about first-class vulnerabilities, because that's actually going to be pivotal to the MVC for what we're going to call vulnerability management. I don't see Secure and Defend having a separate workflow or entity necessarily for a vulnerability. I think it's GitLab's opportunity to use the same experience and same workflows for both. And that's actually going to be really powerful and unique for us in the marketplace, because the market, when you talk about vulnerability management, is really focusing on live production applications addressing those problems. But I think if we're able to broaden that definition and say, this is how everyone else does it, but we do all that plus more, that's actually going to be much, much better for us as a company.
Cool, thanks. In a way, it might be useful that before going further on that functionality, we already start thinking about the future of merging those two different sources of data to have a unique workflow instead of duplicating the effort then.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's going to be one of the things we'll need to talk about for pretty much every Secure capability. How can we make it amenable to Defend? And every Defend capability, how can we make it amenable to Secure as well? Because they are separate stages and they're different use cases, but they're so closely related that I'm confident there's a quick jump from one to the other in most cases.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I wonder is the persona the same between the two, even? That we think about a centralized security team in an organization might have the same person interacting with an application security test result as a production incident.
I think it's quite different. I mean, this was a discussion we already had, and I have the feeling that for different vulnerabilities, it will be more something like system reliability engineers or something like that, more than developer, software developer. But it's cool to think about having a unique tool, a unique place to see all the possible vulnerabilities.
I think it would be great though if you capture it, if the vulnerability started in secure and gets exploited in production, that you're able to still see that this particular vulnerability was exploited or not. So maybe it becomes like a a flag that says it's a vulnerability that has or has not been exploited.
Yeah, like, hey, you dismissed this vulnerability and now it's been exploited.
Exactly.
To add on some additional thoughts here, because I've had some opinions on where we could go first with this. The one of the advantages we have within GitLab is not only with Defend and Secure, if we think of them as a better together kind of story, we have the advantage of knowing what has been deployed to production environments and where. So that means we already know what has been dismissed, what has been allowed through, and with vulnerabilities not being a static problem, there will always be new discoveries, new vulnerabilities that will happen after something has gotten through. One of the questions that Defend can answer that Secure cannot. Well, Secure can answer what code and what dependencies and what potential part of your container, what part of your application is vulnerable. Defend can answer what servers, what containers, which part of your production environment is vulnerable. So it's not just what application, it's where in your production environment needs to be patched after it has been let through. So there's a, it's a compelling, better together kind of story that ties in, it makes it show that it may be the same kind of workflows, but it's separated by the CD, is the way that I'm beginning to think of these two items. They're very complementary.
Yeah, interestingly, I'll echo the point I made earlier. Just yesterday, I created an issue for the ops team about showing in an incident the most recent deploy and the commit for that deploy, so that if there was an incident resulting after a release, that you would know immediately, like, here's the most recent commit, and maybe you should go check that type of code. And this might just be a little bit of like it says ops next to my name up there. So it might be a little bit of, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. But I do think that there's some overlap between those same workflows we're talking about in incident management and what you just described, Thomas. Cool. That was a great discussion. Anyone want to keep adding to that before we move to Scott's one, which is kind of similar?
Let me add one more item on this point. Yes. For Defend, we don't have to wait on the exploit, because we know as vulnerabilities are discovered, we know what has been let through and what part of your application is vulnerable. So you don't need the exploit. What we need is the discovery of the vulnerability against what has been released. That's the rest of what was in my head, that it didn't escape my mouth. So just wanted to make sure that point was put out there.
Awesome, cool. Scott, I think your question is in a very similar vein, but I'll let you verbalize it.
Yeah, first of all, Kenny, Sam, Thomas, Cindy, it's awesome to see this section get going. My question, so you have themes on slide 5. Thank you for that. One of them is called Inform Action for Other Stages. Could you give me an example of where Defend might be able to feed cool info back? And I know you just covered some ground there, but if there's a different example, that'd be fun.
Yeah, so the one example I think we'll be able to solve, actually provide very soon with the WAF. Imagine if you've deployed a web application that has a SQL injection vulnerability. So that's when an attacker is able to essentially write a command that your database interprets in a way you don't intend. If the WAF is able to identify, hey, a SQL injection has occurred against, say, an authentication page, we can protect and defend against that attack as it's occurring live. And then I want us to be able to create an issue back, tag it against that relevant piece of code, and say, this is a vulnerable part of your application, and then you can fix it during development. And then, the WAF will continue defending against SQL injections, but at that point, once the original vulnerability has been patched, it doesn't matter even if the WAF was removed at that point, the vulnerability is no longer there. And you might have only found that because of the traffic that the WAF was identifying and feeding back to earlier stages.
Love it. Thank you, Sam. Great example.
I think Christopher has the next question.
Yeah, just it's kind of feeding on the principles idea, which is, we've got a bunch of new stages in the last couple of years, and I'm just curious. There's always we're going to go do this kind of mindset of, hey, we're going to go do this, and here's how we're going to go about doing it, and here's the principles we're going to use. But the question, my question is more the opposite, which is, what are the things we're not going to do, or things that maybe we've learned from other stages being created that we want to avoid?
I haven't been here for a stage creation, so I'm not sure if I'm the best to answer that. Philippe, your picture is on my screen, and I don't know if maybe you could speak to the seeding of the secure stage. Any lessons learned or recommendations that aren't already in the handbook?
I have thoughts on this as well.
Swear I was not smiling. Yeah, when I look at the slide 4, I think it's very optimistic to think that we're going to do everything in one quarter. That was one of the problems that we had with Secure at the beginning. We tried to go breadth as much as possible, and we did a lot of things, but it was kind of butterflying over all the features that we wanted to have. In the end, we just had MVCs, and that was a problem because when we started to talk to customers, they were a bit puzzled by the depth of the features we were proposing. So that could be one of the traps, trying to do everything at once. I would be cautious about that, and maybe there is something in the middle between breadth and depth. That would be my advice to start this new stage. But of course, we have a lot more experience now. We can leverage what we've learned in Secure, not only on the technical part, but also on the management part, splitting the stage into more pieces and more teams, all that kind of things.
I just want to challenge that assertion about breadth over depth. And maybe it comes down to, like, do we consider the path we took in the secure stage a success? I think we do. On a business fundamentals perspective, I think we certainly do. It was a huge contributor to our revenue growth in calendar year 2018, and now has become like the linchpin in our ultimate offer and contributing, I think it's like 20% incremental IACV. So I get it was probably painful, and I wasn't here, so I
that's the point. This is
easily.
Speaking. That's why I can talk about breadth over depth. I'm not product. I'm allowed to do that. But it was a frustration for the engineers, believe me.
If I could pivot it a little bit, the lesson learned from Secure specifically that should be applied with Defend, because it has a similar breadth profile that Secure has, is the back-end team needs to be split much more aggressively and much sooner, even if it is a logical split. One of the challenges that Secure had earlier this year was that we effectively had 7 back-end engineers trying to track 7 back-end top-level features. So every engineer having to track 7 things at once, that was too broad for any one engineer to do it. So as soon as we split, even though we didn't change the ratio of engineers to features, what we did allow for is suddenly every engineer had to track 2 to 3 items as opposed to 7. And so there was a lot less mental gymnastics that had to go on from the context switching. And so that alleviated a lot of stress within the backend team as I saw it, because as soon as we split, it alleviated the amount we had to track across the entire stage. So the lesson learned from Secure to me is to split sooner, even if it's a logical split and that we're having an engineer, a manager pull double or triple duty. It protects the engineers and will allow us to maintain velocity as we increase the breadth and the depth of every feature that we're trying to produce there.
Cool. And just to clarify, that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Thomas. Are you saying that in the context of splitting within groups in the Defend stage, or splitting Defend from Secure?
Splitting groups within the Defend stage. So as soon as one back-end engineering team within Defend is established, and as we go breadth for more features, split them. As we add features, let's not repeat the track of 5. This one team trying to track 5 to 6 features, make it so that they're tracking 2 to 3. And do a logical split more aggressively than we did with Secure.
Yeah, and I'll say from a hiring perspective, just my observation of, as we've been splitting teams, hiring the engineering managers to then be able to focus on hiring the engineers seems to like really accelerate our velocity. So in the instances where manager is doing double duty, it becomes painful for them to both ramp new team members, hire a massive team, and still waiting for a peer counterpart. So.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that as well and say, while I haven't been here all that long, I feel like we probably should have started hiring defend people a lot sooner, and perhaps we tried that, and we're just now getting the people coming through. But yeah, I guess I would like to have seen the team formed a few months before our first MVC. Well, as far as people that we're hiring for the project.
Makes sense. And I will say, like, to the development department in general, there's been great coordination about priority between and across stages about where we should be hiring. And I'm not looking backwards and saying we should or shouldn't have done something earlier or later. I think we made decisions about prioritization and they were the correct decisions. I really think going forward, though, we should just think about maybe focus on hiring managers first, and to Thomas's point, splitting teams so that they have less scope and context switching sooner rather than later. We typically wait for like get a team of 6 or 7 and then split. Maybe we split sooner than that.
We can certainly prioritize hiring managers from a prioritization perspective of visibility to make sure that we're going after that. One thing I'd caution on is we really do need to run hiring of managers and engineers in parallel and see just how it plays out for 2 reasons. One, specifically, if you daisy chain those 2, you're going to even be later and everybody's going to be disappointed. The other aspect is engineering managers are harder to find than engineers are, just strictly by the fact of what we expect and the experience levels that we expect associated with that. So because of that, the population is much smaller, and consequently, we have to think about those terms. So agree with prioritization. I just want to be crystal clear. The result may still be is that you see people either showing up in parallel to each other or engineers coming first, and that's just the nature of the way hiring works right now at GitLab.
Cool, makes sense. I don't see any other questions, so I'll just close by saying this was an awesome conversation. Thank you all for participating. Sam and Todd and Thomas and I were kind of like, we don't have a lot of content. We're just getting started, but it was great. This is super useful to me and I'm sure others. So thank you for participating and take care.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.